Good afternoon. Welcome to another edition of BizTalk Weekly. I'm your host, Greg Johnson. Joining us today as my guest is Dave Wolf. Dave, welcome to the program.
Hey, Greg, thanks for having me. I'm excited for this visit.
Good, good. I always like to hear that. Dave, can you just take a couple of minutes, talk about, introduce yourself, the company you work for, and just give us a high-level overview of yourself and your business.
Sure. Well, I'm the CEO of Gardonville Cooperative Telephone. We're a broadband company over by Alexandria, Minnesota. I'm also the CEO of Millerville Co-op Creamery, which is one of the state's last small batch butter producers. It's a 97-year-old company. Gardonville is an 83-year-old company. And then I also lead a land mobile company which does radio communications for public safety. And I'm president of Wireless Engineering Company as well. And then on my legacy life, I'm also involved in some nonprofits that touch elder care, economic development, United Way, that sort of thing. So I keep pretty busy.
Yeah, that sounds like it. You got a full plate there.
Yeah,
We we don't usually run into too many folks who have, sort of that many companies that they're engaged with. Um, Talk a little bit about sort of how that came about, if you can, in a couple of minutes.
well, I'm not looking for punishment. And the legacy piece of these long-lasting companies, it's kind of cool. It's very difficult to not consolidate with fractional CEOs or C-suite people. Smaller rural organizations don't scale as well.
Hmm.
So when I see an opportunity present itself, I certainly throw my hat in. Um, Companies don't all run exactly the same, but if you can get a culture to fit between the different organizations, you can start sharing staff, resources, keep things moving forward.
That's an interesting concept. Yeah.
Mini conglomerate, it's like Sim City.
Oh, I remember that.
Mhm.
What, how did you sort of get started into this leadership role? Let's say your first leadership role. How did that transpire?
My first leadership role was a paper route I took over in fourth grade. And I tell you what, you learn everything you need to know right there.
Oh, isn't that the truth?
Yeah, the
Now,
one thing,
at least half the audience just said, "What's a paper route?" So,
yeah, you're right. It's funny, my biggest obstacle was a dog, back
yeah,
in those days.
yeah. No, I believe it. Were you on your bike or?
Well, this was in Fargo, North Dakota, which allows you to ride a bike, what, 5 months a year?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I have never enjoyed working for someone. I always like
Okay.
to take accountability and responsibility. I'm not afraid to reach for the
Right.
leadership roles in anything I'm doing.
We'll talk about that first one you came to, whether it was the broadband company or the
Mhm.
creamery, and just tell us a little bit about how that came about.
The For broadband, without getting in too deep, I was always coding even back in the 80s when I was a much younger man.
Hmm.
And I'd written some software. It helped me get going in technology. And I started my first internet service about 1990, which was a dial-up platform. And it was the first or second one in North Dakota, actually. And
Hmm.
that was for a co-op telephone. And through that endeavor, I just started pursuing management paths in telcos, which pretty much converted over to broadband companies by the early 2000s.
Okay. Okay.
So my pathway really has been around the internet, and I've been delivering internet products, most of my life, actually.
Sure. Sure. So you've seen obviously a lot of change in that
Yeah.
industry. I mean, you were there at the inception,
Mhm.
and now you look at how, well, I'd almost call the internet mature at this point, right?
Well,
Um,
I was delivering internet before the World Wide Web. Back when Gopher was the protocol people used. And yeah, I'm not, if I tell that to my engineers, they just roll their eyes because
I would guess so, yeah.
their parents hadn't even married yet.
What's when you look over that time span, what stands out to you as like what's changed the most or what development that took place with the internet is something that surprised you the most when you think back to when it first started to today?
That is such an awesome question. I believe wholeheartedly the amount of hacking and security, cybersecurity threats to me, um, is the most evolved piece of the internet to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
that really didn't exist early on, did it?
no, no, not even a little bit.
Yeah.
But and again, there isn't enough time to run through that. Of course, the internet saves lives, and the internet is used for communicating and sharing files and sharing lives and social construct that's just simply amazing. But
Yeah.
those pieces, I believe, have always been there. It's just the fraudulent use of the internet is quite profound now.
Yeah. Yeah, you said that about how the internet now saves lives, and
Mhm.
you think of how embedded it is into our lives
Yeah,
now, where obviously when it first started, it was just sort of this, I thought of it as a research tool. It was just a way to
yeah,
get at information that was difficult to get at without the internet, right? I mean, you had to go to books or libraries or that sort of thing to get that information. But I think of like when you just said that about saving lives, you think back to like I think of like the telephone, right? And I'm old, but I wasn't around when the telephone was invented. Um, but that like that just changed communication wildly, right? Just like the internet did. Um, the internet's not the first time we've seen kind of, a technology boom. We've lived through several of them. Um, but now with the internet being more mature, do you look at how you ever look back at sort of how you were first involved with it, and did you ever expect it would be what it is today? Or was it just something that was so new to you that it was sort of like, let's see where this can go?
another great question. So the company I lead was formed in 1943, and it had crank phone party lines. And they eventually went to single party service with rotary dial phones, and then touch tone, and then equal access, class services, and then the internet. If you can imagine the amount of times this 83-year-old telco has had to reinvent itself,
Yeah.
it's it is crazy to ponder on that. But for me, yes, I believed that we would get there. I believe that the internet would change how the world works, even in 1990. It wasn't
Mhm.
that you had to be a prophet to see that. You could recognize it very quickly um, because there's so much cool energy getting poured into it. And I think when things like Windows 95 came out, when freeware, shareware software was widely available, and when DDS type connections, pre-Ethernet connections from telcos started getting distributed, people had always on connectivity to the internet. That really rocket shipped the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. Well, let me just switch gears with you here a little bit, Dave, but talk
Mhm.
a little bit about, one thing I always like to hear about from business leaders is the topic of success. And
Mhm.
just kind of when you look back upon through your career, what's something you can kind of point to where you say, boy, this is an achievement I really I'm really proud of. And sort of what, describe what that was and sort of what the lessons you took away from that achievement.
Well, on the legacy side of what I'm doing, I think the relationships I've had with IT people, when I say information technology people and
Hmm.
engineers, mentoring or going back into the interns that we've had over the last 35 years. To me,
Right.
that's my favorite legacy piece. But I know I've received countless letters from people in rural areas that had no access and then suddenly got access. And they were thankful about how that changed and shaped their lives.
Mhm.
So, and I'm not doing this alone. The relationships that have been developed along the way are some of the best I could ever hope for. So again, the legacy piece, you're not only changing a demographic, but you're changing the economy of a rural area. And you get to watch this from, from the cheap seats, basically. And again, this is just one piece. I mentioned that the butter company, my grandparents milked cows out in rural
Oh,
North
wow.
Dakota. And they were immigrants from Ukraine. And they relied on the co-ops and the creameries that took the milk and sold them seed. And when the one that we're running it was going under and we took it over, we still make butter the same way it was made in 1946, actually, but it was formed in 1929. It's just they have more newer requirements in 1946 and how you churn butter. But
Sure.
that's legacy stuff there. That's if we don't take this on, it disappears forever.
Right.
And I hate to jump around on your question like that, but that's
No,
what
no,
drives
that's
it.
that's fine. You've got a lot of different experiences to draw on. So, a question might come to you and you may think of it in perspective of the broadband company, or you may think of it in perspective of the creamery, running a co-op. And I think your perspective from either of those is really interesting. It's funny though. So, when I asked that question, I've never gotten a business owner who said uh, that their success was tied to money or profitability, or some have said things like, well, taking a company from one or two employees to 100 employees, a lot of satisfaction from that, right? Because they know how they're impacting people. But your answer is it seems like it's a common denominator amongst business leaders, really is like they're doing this for a passion and not for, dollars and cents. Now we all got to run, if we're running a business, we all got to run profitable businesses or we're not going to be in business for very long. But just, talk about, because you mentioned it with the creamery a little bit, like, if you hadn't taken it over, it would just would have gone away. You know, um, how have how does that impact you thinking about the fact that, hey, we got this co-op that's continuing to go on and impact people's lives?
The the creamery wasn't going under because of lack of opportunity. It was going under from poor management practice.
Mhm.
And when you get into the insolvency of that, I think anybody that's run anything for more than 5 years can step in and help another company turn itself around. I don't think everyone has time to do that, but what's your legacy going to be? Either you do it or you don't, right?
Mhm.
Future you see is the future you get. I maintain that. And I know that my grandparents started out with a horse and a plow on a quarter section of land and built up quite a remarkable. They raised 12 kids in a sod house, for crying out loud.
Oh,
Um, I don't have a tough day, no matter how busy I get. I'm not, my personal tractor is air conditioned with power steering. And, and and it will pretty much run itself. And my success is on the backs of a lot of people that had it a lot harder than I have it.
Yeah,
So if a creamery is going under and it'll disappear from the face of the earth, if you don't take some of your God-given talents to step up and help, then shame on that person. So that what drives me is honestly the legacy of my family more than anything, and they're gone. I mean, these are North Dakotans. This creamery is 150 miles from their home farm,
right.
but and I'm not trying to be all grandstandish on that. That is the honest truth.
Yeah. Yeah. Or you come across very authentic and transparent. So I have no doubt about that. You said something interesting there, though, that just when you think about like legacy and you think about the impact a business can have on
Mhm.
others or a community, just talk a little bit about that in terms of, have you seen or where have you seen kind of community impact from either one of these businesses?
Oh, I've seen dramatic impact on both companies. I think with Gardonville, we do a number of community facing projects. Like right now, we're one of the investors in a new daycare that's going in.
Oh, very
The
cool.
employees donate time to the fire department, to the food shelf, to numerous churches and other school educational things. So we're more, and actually our annual report, I was just looking for it this year to the members, is we're more than internet. And if we can't make an impact in our community, why should the community, patronize us? And to me, that's the frosting. For the creamery, we now distribute butter, and this butter is handmade, right? Well, it's churned with a giant churn, but it's
Right.
hand wrapped. It's in 63 grocery stores now, and we sell 100% of every batch,
Wow.
and we're making it all the time. It's very labor intensive, so at some point we have to get a packaging system, right?
Yeah.
But the letters and the comments that I get on that butter alone almost is it's got to be a top three favorite part of my whole job is to hear people talking about this butter.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
premium butter, and it tastes like what would have been on your counter in 1968.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and butter is one of those things that sort of like went out of favor for a while. It
Yeah.
was quote unquote bad for you, so everybody started to buy margarine. And there's been several products I think like that where they've sort of made a comeback, and folks have recognized that whoever was telling us that didn't have all the facts. So,
But
um,
Greg, imagine this creamery is formed in 1929. The stock market crashes, goes into the Great Depression, survives the dirty 30s, and then it comes out of the big droughts in the 1930s, goes into World War II. You can't even get rubber or any supplies. So their
right,
first year of operation was 1946 without horror shows. Their
yeah,
first 17 years were through the toughest times. And imagine that you get wiped out 80 years later by bad management, you know.
right, right.
So again, that's what was inspiring to me,
Well,
and I apologize for getting so long in those answers.
I think it's awesome that you know the history that far back. Because I mean that's we're coming up on 100 years since
Mhm.
the Great Depression, right?
Have
And
you have you
and
noticed? I'm sorry. Have you noticed how older companies took better minutes in their board meetings than newer companies do? Sorry, I keep interrupting.
I I think there's a lot of companies now that don't take minutes during their board
Yeah,
meetings. But that's another conversation we'll have.
yeah.
But just, we're getting now, like 100, again, 100 years since coming up on 100 years since the Great Depression. And you said
Yeah.
something that really struck me. You think of that time from 1929 to the end of World War II, right?
Mhm.
1946, 1945, let's say.
Mhm.
But just, tremendous change going on in the world and just, tumultuous times. I think we always think we're living in the most tumultuous times, and certainly there's a lot going on in our world today that's tumultuous, right? But it's not
Yep.
the first time a generation has gone through those kind of changes and world events. And I think it's just, it says a lot to businesses that can kind of work through those kind of environmental challenges that they're in. And I mean environmental, like things that are outside of their
Right.
control that are going on, and yet still run successful businesses. When you look at today, 2026, and again, looking at either of the businesses, what's kind of one of the biggest challenge that jumps out from either one of those businesses?
I think now more than ever, you have to make decisions that are outcome independent, meaning you have to do the right thing right away because you're not going to get a do-over.
Mm.
Do-overs are something that you used to get, you don't get them anymore. So you need to do the right thing up front in 2026 and not worry about the outcome. Because if you're doing things right, you may get the outcome you're after. Where prior to COVID, prior to well, at least in the teens, you could at least hope for a do-over. You could ask for a little bit more grace or relief. You probably operated more with the outcome in mind. I notice companies that are maybe a little shadier right now are having a tough time um,
Sure.
luring and retaining customers.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think going back to, your discussion about the internet, the one thing the internet's done is it's really flattened how we do business.
Oh
And
yeah,
it's made things so much more transparent, right? I mean, if there's a customer service issue for a business, not only does the customer who was impacted by it know, but probably everybody else who's a customer, who used to be a customer, who might be a customer in the future, knows about it because it's posted somewhere on the internet. It might be a Google review. It might be, on any one of the social media platforms.
and it
It's
lives
just,
forever. It just keeps
yeah,
living.
yeah, 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 exactly. And just how how would you say that from a business standpoint impacts, either your business or, speaking more generically? I mean, when you've got that sort of, let's call it transparency, meaning that anything that happens kind of in your business is sort of going to be out there. How does that, from a leadership standpoint, how does that impact you?
It affects everything. It affects your ability to recruit and
Yeah.
retain. I hired an analyst maybe 2, 3 years ago, and that person's role is to measure everything. When I say everything, we're measuring everything, and we're dumping that everything into AI to give us bizarre feedback on trends that we weren't even aware of. And you can almost pinpoint down the negatives and pinpoint down the positives where they're coming from.
Mhm.
But customer feedback or public feedback, and one of our trends is 1 out of 6 comments on social media, negative comments about a company tend to be accurate. 1 out of 6. That's
Mm.
what we're seeing. That's our
That's it.
that's Dave's data here. So if anyone's watching this,
Yeah,
so you have to take that with a grain of salt. But the problem is negative negative post lives 24/7 by 365.
right, right,
And it takes a lot of positives to offset that.
right.
So,
Well, interesting what you just said about, 1 in 6
mhm.
being being accurate. Is that how you phrased it? Or
Yeah, being accurate.
yeah,
Some people like to pile on.
right, right. So there's this Dave's data says that not every negative review is accurate. And
Mhm,
yet I think as consumers of that type of a review,
mhm.
we believe them.
Oh yeah.
I don't know what it is about reviews that we're so um, that we think we're so questioning of the news these days, but then when we read a review, we're like, oh, well, I'm not going to that restaurant or I'm not going to use that
Mhm.
business, right? Even though that five out of six of those may not be accurate. So it's interesting how that sort of that impact of that immediate data and how it's again how transparent it is to people can affect leaders of companies.
How hard that is in a restaurant. If a bogus, let's say 3 or 4 reviews, or they're getting shadow banned or deprioritized in search rankings. I mean, you need to optimize your searches now for AI searches, not for Greg Johnson search. And
Right.
you have to tailor your ads to be understood by AI as well.
That's yeah, yeah. We'll talk about another technology revolution, that we're in the midst of, right? We spent a fair bit of time talking about the
Yeah.
history of the internet, but now we're into another, phase with artificial intelligence. And
Mhm.
what kind of impact are you seeing from AI in your businesses?
So we host upstream internet for an, a large area. I don't want to get too specific in case some
Yep.
hackers are watching right now. And at its peak on the transit traffic, which is the traffic that's going out into the internet. And a lot of people may not know this, but most of the internet traffic never goes out on the internet. It's cached or peered or connected direct to where you're going. So let's say you're going to a Meta platform, you might just be directly connected to Meta versus going out on the open range out there. But we were seeing a peak of about 35% of the traffic, the transit traffic, being AI sourced traffic, which is insane. That's a lot.
Meaning what?
That means that the AI is using the internet.
Okay. Okay.
AI use of the internet is huge, but AI itself is using the internet too. And I think anybody that's using AI like ChatGPT or Copilot or Claude or any of those know it hallucinates constantly, and it's a little weird to use, but it's definitely not going away, and we're seeing dramatic increases in consumption bandwidth
Mhm.
with AI.
Yeah. 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 That's well said. Turning to a little bit different angle here,
Mhm.
Dave, but
Mhm.
as business leaders, uh, I've talked with a lot of them who have faced a lot of, kind of the risk involved with running a business.
Mhm.
Can you talk about a time where you've had to, kind of a pivotal moment in one of the businesses where you really had to, kind of make a decision that really had a significant impact on the business? What was it and how did that turn out?
Well, the hardest decisions for any leader are people decisions.
Yeah.
I bet I bet you would get that answer 100% of the time. When I was a young man prior to these roles, I was leading a different company, and I was like in my early 30s, and it was a tech company, it was a startup, and I was replacing a different leader. The company was hemorrhaging money, and um, things weren't going well. Let's just put
Hmm.
it there, which brought
Hmm.
me in, and I had to lay off half the company on my
Oh, wow.
second day.
Hmm.
And it was a
Bet you were
15-hour
popular.
day, and I learned a lot. But one thing I did, and I'm glad I went through that, I always operate today knowing that the wolf is at the door, meaning I never want to lay another person off
Hmm.
as long as I'm a working person. So I needed that. and I have perspective that I hope most people never have to have. A day like that is brutal. That was probably the toughest day, but it worked. The company was able to get turned around and
Oh,
we rebuilt, and it's still going to this day.
yeah, I'm sure that has had a lot of impact on, like you just said, you never want to have to do that again because I'm sure you went home that night, you didn't feel very good
Mhm.
about yourself. And even though it was, it was your second day on the job, right? I mean, these were all things that transpired before you got there. You just had to carry out
Well,
kind
nobody cares about how many days. If you're the CEO, nobody cares how many days you've been on the job. And I had more hair back then too, Greg.
of. One thing I liked that you said was, how those people decisions are, I think the most challenging for leaders to make. And yet so many decisions have a people component to it.
Mhm.
Even if you're looking at buying new equipment or you're putting in a new IT system to run your business, both of those things impact people who work for you, your customers. You can't get away from the impact your decisions have on the people who work for you, on your customers, on your vendors. Um, and I think it's the right mentality to have for business leaders to think about, what's the impact to the people who depend on this business, and just always having sort of that empathy, I think is a good word to just really recognize how that's going to impact people. Because you think of like buying a new piece of equipment. You might be putting somebody out of a job because of that, right? Maybe something that's taking 4 or 5 people is only going to take 2 people. At the very least, you're going to have people who are going to have to maybe get retrained or move into a different part of the company, perform a different role, and here I'm just saying it, right? But when you think about if you have to live that, I mean, that can be a very tumultuous time for an employee to have to get retrained or learn a new job.
Well, you're looking at your culture too, right, Greg? And
Mm.
I mean, culture is driving the ship. And as the leader, you have to decide what you can and can't tolerate. So when you're making a career change for somebody, or maybe you're separating them from your company, it's it's to preserve other jobs often as well. It is it's not a fun part of the role for sure, but it's an essential part of the role. And people that are unwilling to address those issues, whether it's HR issues or maybe it's cash management or maybe how they count
Mhm.
inventory or being in front instead of going in your office and hiding every day. Um, they're probably not embracing their culture properly at that point too. Um,
Yeah, or the culture has kind of been built that it is a culture of sort of hiding during the tough times, right? Right?
yeah.
Or being sort of not out in front of issues when they're tough issues to deal with. Leadership is easy in good times, right? Right. I mean, I always tell folks, I think, when the business is going well and you're the leader, um, you know, it's a pretty it's a pretty fun job, right?
Mhm.
But it's those times when, and every business goes through them, and they go through them a lot, where there's
Mhm.
you know somersaults going on, right? There's
Mhm.
the business is turned upside down, maybe because of what's going on in the market, maybe because of what
Yeah.
a competitor is doing. Maybe you've lost a key employee, right? Or a key client, right? That's when it starts getting tough. And I like how you said that about, whether it's good times or bad times. I think leaders they need to be visible. They need to be in front of their employees. How what's a method you use, Dave, to sort of make sure that you you stay visible and stay kind of um, showing, let's say.
Well, I mean, I have to live within alignment with myself, so I have to manage how I'm feeling when I walk in the door or am coming into any meeting. And, some of my disciplines, and this is going to sound ridiculous, but you asked, like I'll listen to polka music in the morning, and I don't listen to any public or, I'm sorry, FM or AM radio shows, nothing like that.
Yeah.
I enjoy music. I enjoy like old weird polka music, that sort of thing, to reset my brain. And then when I walk in the door, you just have to be the same person every day. You
Yeah.
have to be in alignment. And like the companies that anyone runs, they're very elastic, right? They're doing this all the time. But you're in the center of that. And you have to be consistent. You have to be fair, and you have to be inside your own alignment. You have to be a force of stability
Mhm.
too. I've seen people, I've gone to visit other companies, and the leader will come in mad or come in happy, or my goodness, what a selfish way to view the world.
I think that is so well said, Dave. As a business coach, I see all sorts of that, right? And I see the folks who are sort of, the steady rocks
Mhm.
is the way I would look at you. And then I see others who, really like they wear their emotions on their sleeve, right? And everybody knows whether it's going to be a good day or a bad day 5 minutes after the leader gets there.
Isn't that something? You're
And
dialed in on that.
yeah, yeah, and it's just because all eyes are on the leader, and if that's not a role people don't like, then you shouldn't be in a leadership role because it's true that folks are looking at the leaders to guide, to set the culture, to really define sort of how that business is going to be run, right? The culture, that was the word you used. And so many business owners, I think, get sort of, you know, kind of egocentric. They're just thinking about themselves and they're not thinking about how what they're doing or saying or carrying themselves is impacting the people around them. And those are the people they're counting on to be running the business because, as as a business leader, you can't do all the heavy lifting yourself. You need others to get work done for you to be successful.
Servant leadership is a huge thing. I No one can do it alone. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I completely agree with that.
Well, Dave, as we wrap up here, if you were sitting in front of somebody who was walking into a leadership role for the first time, what kind of advice would you give to them, or what would you say to them to encourage them or to be thinking about?
Well, I always encourage younger or newer people, not younger, but newer people. Don't chase titles, chase responsibility. At least for me, always show up, to solve real problems, contribute. People notice that. I mean, at the end of the day, the future you see is the future you get. So if you see a lot of problems, you're going to have a lot of problems. And the time to take risk is right now. There isn't a day that you shouldn't reach for something higher, harder. Nobody was built to be comfortable. I don't know where we got that idea. You should be stretching yourself. You should be uncomfortable. You should be reaching, even though I hate that word should. And to a newer person, don't be afraid to fail. I failed countless. I think I make three big mistakes a day. At least that's my quota. That's what my analyst would tell me. And I forgive and forget and move forward and don't repeat, right? I mean, it's for somebody who sees limitation in the mirror, like, oh, I don't have the right education. I've never finished a degree. I've never finished one. I've started a bunch of them. And but I'm blessed in so many areas where I was told I could never do it. But I believe in myself, and I believe that if I'm surrounded by the right people, the 5 people closest to me help me help me grow, help me attain. So for that new person, start today. Don't wait. Don't, being ready isn't a feeling, it's a decision, right? And being ready is right now. So put your resume together and throw it in on some job you're underqualified for. You might surprise yourself.
Oh, that was really well said, Dave. Well, thank you for being on the program. I really enjoyed our discussion. You had some really, I think, insightful comments, and we maybe talked history more than I would have thought we would have, but that was an interesting impact on, sort of what's going on in today's world. So thanks again, Dave, for being here.
Hey, Greg, I'll send you a pound of butter. So keep your fingers.
I'd like that. I'd like that.
All right.
Uh,
Thank you for having me.
all right. Thanks for being on the show. Until the next edition of BizTalk Weekly, I'm your host, Greg Johnson. Thanks for watching.